Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal.
Welcome back to the Mothers of All Crime. This week we're going to be talking about Martha Stewart.
So we watched Martha, a documentary on Netflix, which I personally thought they did really well. And they involved Martha both with interviews and they pulled in some tapes with other stuff. And they kind of painted a picture of her entire life, which I liked. It wasn't just this polished, perfect version of her, it was the good, the bad, kind of a mixture of both. I thought they did a really nice job.
Absolutely. I feel like I learned things, I felt things. It was a good documentary.
Yeah. It does reinforce the fact that I do love her. And
I do too.
towards the end, we're going to get into her relationship with Snoop Dogg, but that is probably one of my favorite celebrity friendships of all time. So
Oh,
I
definitely.
I'm excited to talk about her today.
Me too. I'm excited to talk about the documentary. I thought it was really interesting. And I feel like, with Martha Stewart, what you think of is someone who is so aspirational, like so above what most people could be and most people could achieve, but she is also so relatable and very real. And so I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of the documentary started from her early life where
Mm-hmm.
she was kind of just like everybody else, right? She was born into a family of 6 children. She was from New Jersey, New York
Jersey
area.
girl.
Yeah, and like really just hardworking. Her family grew up, I would kind of describe it lower middle class from what I was researching in addition to the documentary. And
Right.
early on, she got recruited to be a model. And most of her checks, she was just giving back to her mom to help take care of all of these other children in her family, which isn't always the case, right? Like a lot of people, I feel all of a sudden their career starts to take off. They start to think about themselves. And early on, she was very focused on making sure her family was still taken care of, which granted I think she was a minor still at the time, so they were in charge of it anyway, but it was interesting how that was one of the first things that she remembered talking about that time period.
Yeah. And I did not realize, like, her when she was talking about her dad in the beginning, she was saying that he was a perfectionist, that he's like so handsome, that like she's very similar to him, that she was always his favorite. And so I was kind of gearing up to hear about how great her dad was. But it sounds like he also was an alcoholic that couldn't hold a job, that was pretty abusive.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to hear from a golden child in this situation who probably received less of the abuse because she was the favorite.
Mhm.
And I wish her siblings were more involved in this documentary, because I'm just sure that that would be like the differences in the way that they viewed things. But also Martha became a breadwinner in the home, so her role it became even more significant at that point. How do the other siblings compete with that?
Yeah, we don't know, at least solely from the documentary, a lot about her siblings. And it would be curious what their relationship is like both then and now, from being the favorite from her words, but
Mm-hmm.
also someone who really embodied a lot of those same characteristics that her father had. And throughout her career, she really got this image of being perfect or trying to be perfect. And it
Mm.
shows that connection, right? Where that came from, where the like anal detention to detail originated.
Yeah, I think so too. I just think it's very interesting that she developed her love of gardening as a result of her father gardening so much because they couldn't really afford food. Like, it's just such an extreme, like, her version of gardening now and over the last 30, 40 years has just been so different than that gardening for survival.
Right.
But it seems like where it all started.
What a couple $1 million will do.
Well, yeah. I mean, sheesh, whole bunch of money.
Yeah.
But Martha was always very, very intelligent, also, like a genius in some ways. And she got a full scholarship to college in New York. She's very popular there, as she did not mind telling us.
Yeah, that's true. So I actually did a little side research for schooling. She mentions Barnard College, which is part of Columbia. And I thought that was kind of interesting that she didn't just straight out say Columbia University. But she first majored in chemistry, then she did art history, and then she went to architectural history, which feels like a very wide spectrum. The only one that didn't surprise me is the art history one.
Yeah. I think that she was so smart that she could do anything and then had to kind of hone in on what she was actually interested in versus what she would just excel at, which I think would probably be everything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, from her life, that's kind of how it ended up. Well, all but one category.
Yeah.
And
Well,
speaking
I guess you
of
could
said
say that,
category, she met her first husband, or technically her only husband, Andy Stewart, through a friend on a blind date when she was 19. And
through his sister. She saw Martha. His sister saw Martha on campus and was like, "You're so beautiful. Do you want to go out with my brother?"
Oh, I interpreted
That's
that
how
as
they met.
like they were friends and she set them up. Oh, interesting. Just some strange. Can you
Yeah,
imagine some stranger just walking up to you and then agreeing to it?
Yeah, definitely not. But I guess it kind of worked out in this case because they very quickly developed a big romance. Andy proposed, and Martha's father had a very bad reaction to that, which he kind of tells in like a sing-songy kind of way, but she said that he was a bigot and he was not happy with Andy being Jewish. And Martha being Martha was like, I don't care, I'm marrying him anyway, which you gotta love that.
Yeah. And he was in a law school, so it wasn't like he was not doing well for himself or going to do well for himself. But he also came from money, right? And they took a 5-month honeymoon through Europe. And at 19,
amazing,
which is hard for me to even wrap my brain around. But I think from what I took from the documentary, this really sparked her love and fascination for food and how beautiful it could be. Because one thing Europe does really well is truly enjoying mealtime, right? It's an ordeal. It's not just sit, eat, and go, which a lot of Americans experience. So being immersed in that for 5 months is really extraordinary, and I think foreshadows a lot of her future actions.
Definitely. And I think it was also just the exposure to different food, different art, different wine, different olive oils. Like at the time, you couldn't just go to Whole Foods and get the best of Europe cuisine. You know, the food was it was different. She'd never experienced food like that before. So I think it opened her eyes to a world of new possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think she was definitely inspired by the art, definitely inspired by the food. And it sounds like an amazing trip. She did have one weird story, though, which I didn't really know what to think about.
Yeah.
But the one night, you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
She went to church without Andy the one night, and it was just so beautiful and so romantic of a setting that she ended up kissing a stranger.
In church.
And in the church. Yeah. And I felt like the producers were kind of ribbing her about it a bit. And she was like, oh, come on. Not a big deal.
Yeah,
like,
it was an emotional moment.
It
wasn't infidelity. Yeah, right? Something about it was an emotional moment. It wasn't infidelity, which...
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
to each his
could be
own.
both.
I wouldn't be a big fan of that if on my honeymoon my partner was kissing people in public. Kissing people in general, I really should say.
On our honeymoon.
On our honeymoon.
Yeah, no, it's fine if he does it in private.
Yeah, right. It's different.
Oh yeah.
But I think the reason that they kind of harped on it is because as we talk about this documentary, there are a lot of she's so successful. She was great at pretty much everything she did, but her love life continuously was her point of unperfection. And I think that's kind of why they kind of zoned in on that, where something wasn't perfect. And it goes both ways, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think Martha said herself that she struggled. I don't know if she said she struggled, but that she is not affectionate and that she doesn't really care what men feel or what they think, which for sure. But I also think they made a real point in highlighting that motherhood was a struggle for her. And that kind of is in the same way of it's like a woman is supposed to have a marriage that defines her, and being a mother is something that defines you. And I don't think those things really define Martha. And she's not able to stay in those boxes. Not that they're bad boxes, but I just don't think it worked for her. And I think if she was born at a different time, she probably wouldn't have gotten married or had a baby. But that was just sort of the expectation.
Yeah, I definitely
Especially
don't
so
think
young.
she would have had a baby. I think she literally said, I had a baby because it's what you do. Like, that's just what
Yeah.
you people did. And for someone who she kind of kept getting described or hinted towards of like being a man or having manly traits. And I think this is something that a lot of women in higher positions or authority or who strive for certain levels of achievement outside of the home, you get this reputation of it's okay if a man does it, but not a woman. And she really was ahead of that time where she didn't care about your emotions. She cared about your actions. What do you want to do with your life? Show me what you want. Like, work for something, not just, oh, I care about you. I think you're beautiful. I think she had enough confidence in herself where she's like, I know I'm beautiful. What are you going to do about it? Like, she didn't need that validation that sometimes people need.
Right. I think that she needs validation in other ways, but it doesn't come from motherhood and it doesn't come from marriage in the way that maybe it would typically, especially at the time. And I think if you're not affectionate and you weren't shown affection as a child, it can be really hard to convert that into I'm now a loving mother when previously she'd been a 20-year-old with no responsibilities. It's a big change, and it's not easy for anyone, and it's very glamorized, very romanticized. And I think it didn't meet her expectations, which is a bummer for Alexis. But
yeah, they did say that they never were like
things.
She's a bad mom. I think she just wasn't like the doty, touchy, feely kind of mom. It definitely seemed like she raised her daughter very well, but she probably just raised her differently than that of a lot of the other moms in the time. Because she really wanted a career, and there was no secret about that. And her husband and hers relationship was rocky from if you count Italy, then it was pretty much from the beginning. But she definitely kept bringing up the fact that her husband had multiple affairs, had multiple girlfriends over their relationship. Yet the producers did bring up that she did have, quote, one affair. But Martha was like, no, it was just an Irish man. It was nothing. Like, she was so casual about it. But like, her husband did it. It was this awful thing.
Well, I do think that Martha has a lot of double standards. Like, things that she does, that's totally okay. That's totally justifiable. And things that other people do to her in a negative way, I mean, you can't deal with that. And she literally said, if your husband cheats on you, he's a piece of shit and you should leave him. And the producers were like, but Andy said you cheated on him first. And she was like, come on, grow up. Like, she was just like, it wasn't that big of a deal, but him doing it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
So she became like a stock market broker for a while and was making a ton of money.
Yeah, she
And
was one of the
then
first
markets
women,
crashed.
one of the first women down there, which
Yeah.
is monumental, really. Like, you are
There was
one of the,
no women's bathroom
yeah, first women in
at the
the
whole office.
industry. And
Yeah.
making, I did the conversion. At the time, it was $250,000 a year, which today is $2.3 million a year.
Woof. That was a lot of cheddar.
Mm-hmm.
But she couldn't handle the ups and downs. She's not patient, which we'll get to later for sure. The volatility of the market, she did not like that.
Mm-hmm.
So she kind of bailed on being a stock market broker, even though she was extremely successful at it. And that's when they bought their dream home in Westport. She started doing a lot of hosting and catering. And that's when she kind of, it seems like she started to become like the homemaker version of Martha Stewart.
Yeah.
Obviously, still a business minded woman doing the catering stuff, which was very, very expensive, like very successful as well. And she really showed perfectionism in everything that she did and started getting approached about doing cookbooks, had her own ideas for that as well. And I love how she thought out of the box and she did new things, and she was like the first influencer basically.
Yeah, she was one of the, you're right, she was like the original influencer before everyone was trying to do it. She was the first person to, like, without naming it, make charcuterie boards, which we're now all obsessed with. Looking back at these photos and stuff she posted, that's what she was doing. She was building charcuterie tables and just making things beautifully and aesthetic for these parties and businesses and home parties. And you think about it today, we're like, oh yeah, we'll just like make one. But back then it was like brand new. So she's just so ahead of her time and very creative. And by approaching this, she started, like you said, writing those books, getting her name out there. And then she started doing brand deals again, what a lot of influencers now do.
Yeah,
And she got
absolutely.
into
And
the home decor world.
and weddings. She was doing the wedding books, like the magazines, the books, and she was doing that book tour for her Martha Stewart wedding books when her marriage with Andy really started to fall apart. And so she was literally going through a divorce while promoting the idea of a perfect wedding, which had to be such a tough mental thing to do.
Yeah. Because they asked her about it and she pretty much was like, listen, I'm not going to talk about it. I gave you all the letters. She's like, you can take information from there, which I do respect, right? So she was approached with this project. I have a documentary on her life, and she knew that there were certain things she didn't want to talk about, but didn't take it off the table. She still gave producers information that they could refer to, which I have a lot of respect for, because she very easily could be like, I don't have any letters, or it was a very cordial thing. Like, you know what I mean? And these letters,
She
showed,
the letters are harsh.
yeah, and it was harsh, like, but then it ranges, right? It shows pain, it shows anger, it shows jealousy. It kind of hit every aspect of the spectrum, which I think you mentioned is like, no wonder she's promoting a wedding version of her magazine or book or whatever the case was, well, her marriage is falling apart after 27 years.
And Andy literally was having an affair with someone that worked for her that she had allowed to move on to their property. So this was all hitting extremely close to home, hitting her businesses, which really hurt her, affecting her view of her own home after they spent so much time and money and effort redoing the whole house. And then you are sleeping with someone on my staff that I let move in here. Like, just the betrayal across so many different levels. It's clearly he just had no respect for you.
Yeah.
And I don't know what their marriage was like, intimacy wise, or if they were really getting along, or if this was just one in a string of a million, like she kind of makes it seem.
Mhm.
But I think for most people that would kind of be the limit. Although I think that she clearly really cared about Andy. I don't know if that was expressed a lot through the marriage, but I think that the betrayal obviously hurt, and I think still probably hurts.
Yeah.
And it was embarrassing.
Absolutely. Oh, but I think that's the nail on the head, right? She was embarrassed.
Yeah.
And she was
Yeah.
very concerned about it being public. And thankfully for her, I think at the moment there were so many other things going on that it kind of got brushed under the rug where a lot of people didn't zone in on it. And
Yeah.
like it wasn't like she was partnering with the magazine. She made her own magazine and she started a TV show and she was told like she should be going towards a more middle and upper class where she then went, hold on, everyone deserves to make their home the best version of what they want it to be. It doesn't matter how much money you have, which I think is her childhood kicking in, right? Like I didn't have this, but I wanted it. And she went into Kmart, which if people don't know Kmart, I grew up near a Kmart and Kmart had some really good stuff. Like, and it was a deal.
Yeah.
Like, and I loved that about
I remember
her.
there being Martha Stewart crafts at our Kmart and always wanting them because they
Yeah.
were really good quality stuff.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing.
I
It's
was
like
can I please get the scrapbook paper?
you still get that quality at a lower price. And I like that she did that in addition to the other stuff. So, because I remember growing up
Yeah.
as a kid and granted she's a lot older than us, but like I still remember her products and I'm sure they're still out there. But like you could go to Kmart and you could go to like Bed Bath and Beyond, two drastically different prices, and you could find sometimes the exact same stuff, which I really loved that she did because it brought her vision of educating people regardless of your income to live the way you want to
Mhm.
live, which I love. She also had no problem
Yeah,
telling
me
people
too.
no.
Yeah, which I also love. And I think that she was totally right. And the people that she was really marketing to were not these very, very wealthy people that she's rubbing elbows with that are having their parties catered.
Mhm.
It's more appealing to people who are hosting their own parties that want to decorate, that want to have a nice tablescape, that want to do a fancy Thanksgiving, want to have a luau in their backyard and
Yeah.
need aesthetic ideas. This is before Pinterest. This is before Instagram. So these magazines had a lot of inspirational pictures and tips and recipes, and everything
Right.
with Martha is if you follow my directions 100% and you do everything perfectly and you cut no corners, it's going to be amazing.
Right. And
That's achievable for anybody.
yeah, like if you follow directions, great. That's all you need. And she
Yeah.
again was expanding on this idea of the perfect sweet housewife, how you could do it, how you could make everybody else happy and do it all, right? You can she was trying to enable
Mm,
this of I work, but my house is perfect, my food is perfect, like having this image.
right. And this is when she got the house in the Hamptons and she started dating Charles, who is a billionaire. She started having the TV
Casually.
shows. Yeah, I know. I feel like there's so much stuff with Charles that they didn't really get into in the documentary, but I guess it's not that significant now.
Yeah.
But
In the
this
grand
is
scheme
also
of things.
yeah, he's not as interesting as Martha, that's for sure. But her company went public, which was also a huge, huge deal. And that's when she became the wealthiest woman in the world and the first self-made female billionaire in America, which is a crazy accomplishment.
Yeah. And like when they made that statement, and this is horrible, but my brain was like, she actually did it. She came from a family that literally had nothing, that was growing their own food,
Mm-hmm.
expensive to buy stuff.
Right.
And then you have
Exactly.
a couple years ago, Kylie Jenner, love her, but on the poster, like, I'm a self-made billionaire whose parents are also millionaires. Like, not really as self-made.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I got a giggle out of that.
Absolutely. I know. It's like you have a million famous people in your family. Being a billionaire, is it actually going to change your life at all?
Right.
And
And I think it was
that's
a
different.
huge accomplishment for her, but I also don't think it was nearly as impressive as someone who came from
Yeah.
basically nothing, had zero support, made it
Yeah.
on her own. And I just wanted to kind of put it in perspective, the kind of money that she was making in the 90s, not
Absolutely.
even today.
Absolutely. That is a good point. Because being a billionaire in the 90s, she said it herself. She's like, it actually meant something then. I was like,
Right.
it still does. But that is such a crazy rich person thing to say. And I do kind of love it. I agree with you about the Kylie stuff. Although I guess you could say Kylie didn't really need to work. She didn't really need to develop skills and use them and
Yeah.
market things and
Oh, don't get me
whatever.
wrong.
And
I think
Martha had to.
Kylie is
But
great,
the
but it's
resources
just
are different.
different,
Yeah.
right? And I agree with you. It was a crazy rich person thing to say. But I also kind of get where she's coming from, where making $1 million in the 90s, I'm going to go down just $1 million. Making $1 million in the 90s was a lot more far-fetched than making $1 million today. Because if you're looking at like your average income, most people weren't even making 100K in the 90s, and they were supporting full families.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you need 100K. Like, most people in New York City are making that. Like, it's not just here and there, it's like a norm. And if you're making $30,000 a year today, you're really struggling, versus $30,000 in the 90s. You were probably struggling, but probably not. You probably could squeak by. So I think she kind of was trying to point out the fact of money was a lot harder to earn back then versus money now. Everything's just so expensive now, but it's also a lot easier to, quote, have money.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that no one could take away what Martha achieved on her own. She did also marry extremely wealthy, which is a nice leg up for sure. But she put herself in the position to be able to do that by getting a college scholarship. Like it all comes back to her work ethic and what she was willing to do and what she was willing to achieve. Which also makes what comes next more interesting, I guess. But also I have a lot of thoughts. I think we should just talk about what happened and then we could talk about what we think about it.
Yeah, I'd agree with
Does that make sense?
So you want to start with December 2001?
So you start and I'll pick up.
Yeah. So
December 2001.
December 2001. Basically, Martha, knowing that she's involved with her history of the stock market, there's no surprise that she is investing in multiple places, multiple areas. She's got people assisting her and brokers doing some of her investing for her. And one of the things she invested in was I'm Clone Systems, or I Am Clone, or however you pronounce it, which is
Imclone, but I'm not sure.
Sure, let's go with that. I'll say it with confidence.
That's what I thought. Okay. All right.
Biopharmaceutical company, and they were working on a cancer drug. However, she then sold 4,000 shares that she had with them, which converted it was $45,000 at the time, about $82,000 for today's conversion. And she was suspected of doing that because she was given a tip that those stocks were going to drop. And the tip, the purpose of that connection was she knew the higher ups in the company. Her broker also was getting rid of his. Like, there were a lot of people at the same time getting rid of these stocks and shares. So they kind of zoned in and she ended up getting arrested for conspiracy,
Mhm.
obstruction of justice, making false statements to the federal investigators, and she had a fraud originally charged, but that ended up getting dismissed and not actually going forward. But it is important to note that they originally looked at her for insider trading, but never once was she charged with it. Never once was it put up against her. It was just the initial question
Mhm.
mark.
Right. And the timeline, it's a bit sus. She's basically like on her way to Cabo. She's on vacation. She takes this call. Imclone did not get FDA approval, and so she's selling. And this was, people saw her take this call. You know, there's witnesses, her friends who end up testifying later. And um I actually thought that she'd been charged with insider trading prior to watching this documentary.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that she was never charged with insider trading. I mean, that was what they wanted to get her on, but she really got in trouble for lying to the FBI because she kept saying that she did not recall about things that she, I guess, did recall, which is hard to prove usually. Like, people don't
Mhm.
usually get custodial sentences for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the back and forth was she made some contradictory statements, which I think is why they doubled down on the lying aspect. Where in one conversation, she stated that she sold because it dropped below $60 a share. There was another one where she was told that her broker was like, "Hey, I think this would be a smart business move. I would advise you to do so." And she said, "All right, sure, go for it." Like, there were contradictory statements about the same thing. But it really was the U.S. attorney, Jib Cooney, um,
Mm.
who really seemed to double down on Martha specifically for some reason. And Peter, who was the broker, actually makes a statement that Jim really wanted him to say Martha knew. So there seemed to be this focus in on Martha, the celebrity, the billionaire, like take her
Right.
down, the woman in power. He kept pushing Peter
Exactly.
to say she knew and that's why she did it. And he never did, because he still to this day stands by, I never told her anything. Like, she
He
chose
does
to
say
do
that,
it.
and I think that that is is splitting hairs, because I think he told people to tell her
True.
instead of telling her himself, which, whatever, I guess that's not technically a lie. Very close though.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what one of the things that really got her was Douglas something. He was an assistant
Yeah.
that she had been very rude to on the phone, and he was like, she was just a bitch basically. And so I helped get her convicted, and then her friend ended up testifying against her, and she did not take a plea, and she was found guilty. And while this was all going on, the press was wild, and Martha
Mm-hmm.
Stewart Living was tanking, which is now a publicly traded company, which is great until you lose your public favor. And then the whole business is Martha Stewart. It's her image, it's her face, it's her brand, it's her personality. It's all about her.
Yeah.
So now that she is being called into question and being labeled all these ways as a criminal, as an insider trader, someone who's obstructing police investigations, she really got the book thrown at her and was made a public spectacle. And it had a massive impact on her business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in
Yeah,
January
which
2004, which is when the trial started in New York, went for about 3 months, and March 5th, she was found guilty on 4 counts. 1 count of conspiracy, 1 count of obstruction to justice, and 2 counts of false statements to a federal investigator, which include felonies. And the broker was convicted of similar charges. Sam Waxow. I'm terrible with names today.
I think it's Waxel.
Who was the CEO of the company. He actually pled guilty to security fraud, bank fraud, obstruction of justice, perjury, conspiracy, and wire fraud. And again, not one of them has insider trading charges, which originally was what we were going after, which I thought was interesting. But again,
I do think that's very interesting because she's basically being convicted of lying about insider trading that they were not able to prove actually happened.
Right. You're convicted of a crime that you didn't actually commit. You just lied about it, which is a weird brain
liar.
flop. But either way, she got her sentence and she went to jail, which I think this was like early on where everyone had the mindset of like, if you're famous or you have enough money, you can get out of anything. And this really kind of shows the fact that if they want you in jail bad enough, you're going to jail. Like, I don't care how much money you have.
Especially if you're a bitchy woman. I mean, my goodness.
Oh, we're going to come back to that. Trust me.
I don't think anybody really thought that she was going to get convicted. I mean, in her inner circle, I don't think people thought that she was really going to get convicted or actually do jail time. Alexis actually fainted at the sentencing, at the verdict, I mean, which was sad to think about. And Martha had to resign from the board of Martha Stewart Living, which is nuts because that's literally you. It's your company that you built from nothing, and it's your name, and you now don't have control over it. And I thought it was crazy that she let people film her in the weeks leading up to her actually going to prison.
My guess is some of that was like not an option. Because you could kind of see by her facial expression she didn't want to be there. Because they showed a couple clips of it. And
how can you even force her to do that at that point, though?
Well, I think she forced herself.
For the money?
I think she forced herself because you got to remember, you just said her stocks plummeted. She lost control of her business. All the TV magazines pulled. Her airtime pulled. She lost her board seats. She is trying at this point, would be my guess, to do everything she can to keep her business from literally dissolving. Because, like you said, it's 100% around Martha Stewart, right? Something happens to Martha, the company goes away. I think this was her moment of, how do I keep it alive while I'm gone? Because her sentence was 5 months in federal prison and 5 months of home confinement, plus 2 years probation and a $30,000 fine. Fine, easy. She probably wrote a check and it was like her interest. Like, home confinement in her estate, easy. I would do 5 years of home confinement on her estate. But that 5 months in prison, she is removed from public eye. She's removed from talking to people. She's removed from out of sight, out of mind, right? She was probably thinking, and this is my speculation, what do I got to do to keep people talking over these 5 months? So those things that were being recorded probably came out while she was gone.
That's probably true. Yeah. I guess she wanted to put her own version of things out there, and she wanted to keep her face in front of cameras, and she didn't want anyone to forget about her. But it was kind of raw. And there was that one scene where she's just being completely nasty to one of the women that's working in her kitchen. And then she makes a remark like, "Oh, you can't film that." "Oh, you can't film that." And it's like, well, kind of already happening. And now we're watching it. So I think Martha probably is a absolute nightmare to work for. But moving on, I think that in the prison, she initially had a pretty hard time. And it seems like from her notes and things like that, that she found a lot of the initial prison stay to be pretty humiliating, and a lot of things were embarrassing, and the strip searches and the lack of privacy. I mean, that would be so difficult for most people, but especially someone with the level of wealth and privilege that she'd been living with. to just be in this kind of super vulnerable situation with all these strangers while you're famous. Like, it's not like Martha can just fly under the radar. She's recognizable in a women's prison. And I'm sure it was big news that she was going to be in that prison. So, but it seems like she eventually started to really thrive. She did a lot of speaking. She helped people with business plans. She did a lot of work on the garden in the prison and got supplies for the inmates, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think it really put things in perspective where she was just another inmate. And I did think it was interesting that they sent her to West Virginia to Camp Cupcake is what the name of it was. And I thought that was really funny that they put that in there because it is not a cupcake. But I appreciated they put this in here because she really was treated like any other person. She wasn't special. She wasn't isolated, because going into this documentary, I was under the impression that while she was in prison, she was separate, that she had that kind of, because of her status, a little bit more removed, which is something we do a lot in prisons now, where if you have too much influence, they tend to remove you. Or if you're going into a prison where people are going to be long stays, they have nothing to lose, could cause issues. And she had those experiences that every other person who goes to prison has. And I thought it was kind of funny that she focused it on the food and how horrible it was. Because for her, that was a huge deal, right? Like, she's used to delicious food, but that's also her thing, is food. But she also breezed over the fact of the violence that was happening in the prison. And they didn't touch on this, and producers definitely had her kind of, I think she said it, and I don't think producers were prepared for it. That's why it got glossed over. But prisons are not a happy-go-lucky place. There is a lot of violence that takes place there. And
yeah,
she saw it. She recognized it. She was right there with it. And I don't think there's a doubt in my mind that she was probably involved in some of it. Not necessarily like her jumping someone else, but like a fight in the calf, or someone coming at her, or it was happening next to her. Like, there's not a doubt in my mind that something like that happened at some point, right?
I wouldn't be surprised.
And I don't think the producers wanted to go open that door, just because that opens a whole new can of worms, right? But it was interesting when she was talking about it, her boyfriend, Charles, who they were basically together for 15 years, which is more or less acting like a married couple. He only visited her once the entire time she was there, which, granted, she was only there for 5 months, but that still seems, I don't know. Yeah. Like,
her daughter went every weekend.
Yeah.
But yeah, Charles went once. Although I will say, do you want him to visit every weekend, or do you want him to send the private plane when you get released?
True, he did do that. That was very nice of him.
I'm gonna go with the private plane. You don't have to visit, but I do need to get expressly out of here. And I love that she wore the prison poncho on her way out. And people were like, "Why are you wearing that?" She's like, "Isn't it great?"
But
my
again,
prison friend made it. I just love it.
Again, back to like OG Martha. She's like, listen, everybody has something to offer, and this woman made this, and it's awesome, and I like it, so I like it, so I'm gonna wear it. I don't really care what you say.
Yeah, and then she had like her first like TV shows, like when she came back, and she was like wearing the poncho, and she brought out dogs wearing the ponchos, and it was just like such a funny, kind of iconic move.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was hysterical.
Yeah, me too.
But then when it comes to her boyfriend, I think the last thing that is notable is after her release, very quickly after her release, they were in bed together. And that's when he told her that he was leaving her to get married.
Yeah. Big blow. They were on vacation together, laying in bed, and he's just like, I'm gonna be getting married and I'm not gonna be able to see you anymore. I'm
Like,
sorry, what?
why did you leave
It's like,
me
I thought
while
we
I
were
was in
together.
prison?
Well, at least he sent the plane. Like, it's like you could have sent the plane and then said, by the way, I'm done. And I
Right?
think Charles is just like one of those, and he also married someone who was like 30 years younger and had kids with her like immediately.
Yeah. Well, I think he
So
was getting to that point of like his family was probably like, you need to settle down with a nice girl and make your family, and getting that social pressure, right? And marrying a felon's probably not in that.
Mhm. Oh my god, I guess. Yeah. So, I mean, they broke up. I think there's some, some bad feelings towards that, but who wouldn't be annoyed with that? Business-wise though, I feel like things were not going that well. I mean, Martha had lost control of her company. So, when she came back from prison, she was now kind of more at the mercy of other companies and other producers, and she wasn't making all of the executive decisions, and she was doing like kind of silly shows with celebrities teaching them how to cook, and it just really wasn't her. So I feel like she was sort of struggling. She did not come back in full force after prison, which is understandable,
Yeah.
but I'm sure it was a bummer. It's not like she didn't do anything, but things were definitely different until the roast of Justin Bieber. Most random turn of events.
Which I saw this roast when it happened, and I thought
me
it was
too.
the funniest thing in the world that she was on there. And honestly, I think she made the panel. I think she really balanced it out, which I appreciate, because you had people like Kevin Hart, Shaquille O'Neal, Snoop Dogg, and Martha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she was getting ripped apart by comedians and putting it right back at them. She was so classy for every single thing thrown at her, because she understood it's a roast also. So she has she's funny. She
funny. Did. She had some good liners, and I don't think anyone expected that from her. No one was ready.
For sure they didn't. And she was hilarious. I think she made that roast what it was, and it put her in a different view in people's mind. And that's when she became friends with Snoop Dogg, which has opened a brand new chapter, which I love.
Yeah, I think.
And Snoop is so hyped about her.
They are my favorite. And like, she was explaining it, like, I think this really opened the door for her to show her like raunchy side, because she's a little like little raunchy, little salty, like, but she's, how old is she now? She's 70, and she looks amazing. And
her work is tea.
Oh yeah, she was the oldest person who was featured on Sports Illustrated as a model, and she looks better than most 30-year-olds. Oh my god. And her and Snoop, she truly just rebranded, and they started doing a TV show and appearances, and I think she took on this like sexy grandma rebrand and became popular again. And what an interesting combo. It's just, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, she can really evolve. She can pivot. She can roll with the punches. And I think that her and Snoop really hit it off at the roast. They, she was getting a little contact high because he's smoking, blunt after blunt after blunt next to her for 7 hours. So I'm sure they were, feeling it. And they bonded. They really saw something in each other. And I think part of that is that they have extremely different base audiences, and they were able to make content together that is enjoyed by everyone. Because if you like Snoop, then you can put up with Martha in this situation. And if you're a Martha fan, then maybe you're seeing something in Snoop now that is beyond just rap and hip hop. And I feel like they've both become just more developed celebrities that now do all of these other side quests, and they're at the Olympics together, like hanging out with all the
Yeah.
Olympians' families, and they're just hilarious together. And they make like stoner cookbooks. I love it.
Yeah, I think
And
they just allowed each other to be truly who they are around everybody
Mhm.
else, right? Like, I think that Snoop
Yeah.
probably always had this like goofy, funny mentality, but his image was rapper, stoner, gangbanger. And after this, now he's like goofing around on TV wearing like crazy hats and going to the Olympics and pretending he's an equestrian. Like, versus Martha, I think she always had this raunchy, smoking type to her, but couldn't let the public see that because it wasn't the image, right? Um, and I mean, at the end of the documentary, it kind of ends with her deciding that imperfection is okay, which you could tell she's still a little uncomfortable with as she said it. But I liked that it showed her evolving. It showed that things are going to be okay and everyone can come back from something. If she can go from nothing to the height, fall of grace, and come back again, you can do it too. I think is her subtle message,
Yeah.
right?
And I think it also is like a good example of like if you refuse to be canceled and you're willing to continue to make things, to try new things, to keep yourself in the public eye, there are redemptions. And I think that some people would have just hid away from the world if they were Martha and they had been embarrassed the way that she was. But I just don't think that she was a person that was ever going to stay beaten down.
Yeah.
And she maybe, I don't know that men always have the same appreciation for Martha Stewart. I feel like that's just one thing that I feel a bit binary about. And I think that women have an appreciation for Martha and like what she does specifically in a way that it doesn't really hit a male audience.
Mm.
And that's also a nice thing with Snoop Dogg and her because they are, it's just more exposure and it's like a whole new group of people. And Snoop is a rapper for sure, a performer, smokes a lot of weed, but he's also been married forever.
Yeah.
He has a bunch of kids and grandkids. He's like a very family man. He likes to cook. He likes to, there's dimensions to him.
Right. But
And I think
again,
there's
something that
dimensions to Martha
wasn't
as well.
allowed to be public image, right? He had, and it's changed. And I love
Right.
that. I loved that they can support each other with that.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap this up, what are some of your kind of final thoughts or opinions about the different stuff we've touched? Because we've touched a lot of aspects of her life.
So I think one of my thoughts is that she shouldn't have gone to prison. And I think that that was kind of a misuse of taxpayer money to pursue those charges. I don't think it really accomplished anything for the greater good. I think it just was to stick it to a celebrity, especially a woman. And I think that if she was a man, that she would not have gone to prison in the same circumstance. And that really bothers me.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that because you look at like the CEO, his charges, totally agree with it. The broker, I do agree with that because he's the one who does all of the transactions. But I also find it hard to believe that she's the only one that he apparently gave this information to. There's no way.
Yeah. Like, did his whole family go to prison too? Because
Right.
they also
Just
sold
her.
their shares.
Yeah. All these other
Right.
people. And also, this is the money that she sold was like 40 grand. Like that was peanuts to her. Like she could have lost that and she would have been upset, but I don't think she would have cared. So the fact that they're going after her for this kind of money, I think you're right. I think it was a power move. I think it was a moment the U.S. attorney saw it as an opportunity to make a name for himself, to take down a celebrity, but also,
yeah,
I think I agree where it was her She was a very aggressive, dominant female. And even now, women deal with backlash for that kind of stuff, where if you're aggressive, you're ruthless, you drive for what you want as a man, it's looked at as amazing, encouraging, go-getter, powerful. But if a woman does it, you're a bitch. And if a woman does
Exactly.
it, it's disrespectful. If I tell you you're doing terrible at your job, I'm rude. But if a man tells you, it's criticism. Like, and I
Exactly.
think they really zoned in on the fact that she, quote, acted like a man and ran this company, ran it like any man would. I don't care if you're good at, like, if you're bad at your job, you're replaceable. Like, sorry. I have no need to be tiptoeing around it. And I think
Right.
people who were testifying against her, a lot of them were just bringing up examples of her, quote, being mean or abusive. And don't get me wrong, she probably was a little bit of a bitch.
I'm
But
sure.
I don't
I'm
think
sure.
it was nearly as much as the media and these people were trying to make it seem. I think she just behaved like a, quote, man, and they didn't like it, particularly when her image was
They
a
didn't like it.
housewife.
Right. Although she was achieving in like a completely feminine space, it was still obviously threatening
Yeah.
to men. And they saw this as an opportunity to put her down a notch and make an example. And I think a more appropriate punishment would have probably to be paying back like the money that you
Right.
illegally profited. I think that obviously makes more sense, and like probably a plea should have been able to be reached, and it maybe wouldn't have ruined her whole company the way that it did. Not that I think that rich people should just be able to buy themselves out of a situation, but I do think sometimes custodial sentences for financial crimes just end up costing the actual state and the actual taxpayers way more money.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the benefit to doing this? Like, you did not help anyone. Nobody was in danger to get Martha Stewart off the street. Like,
Yeah.
oh, what is she going to be rude to people who work in her house? Like, definitely. She definitely is going to be like that. But that's not illegal.
Yeah.
And if she's being abusive, then that's a separate thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the complexity of white collar crimes, right? Where that's where people struggle of how damaging is it? How harmful is it? And I think it just depends on what the crime in relation to the money it is. In my opinion, I think if you got a tip that some stocks were falling, I don't think that's a huge deal. Like, in the grand scheme of things, when you have people skimming off retirement accounts, that feels like a bigger deal to me. Or someone who,
also the person giving her the information, that's who's doing something really wrong.
Right. I'm just following the advice of my broker. What's the deal? Like,
yeah, like that's what I hire him for.
Yeah, is to give me advice.
And yeah, she probably did something wrong, but they couldn't prove insider trading, so they should have just let it go, and it could have been a lesson learned, I feel like.
Yeah,
but
hit her with a big fine, call it a day. But I also think this gave her an opportunity to be friends with Snoop Dogg, so I'm kind of thankful for it.
Yeah, it's true. I wish we could see like what would have happened had this not happened, because it was kind of at the height of everything.
Yeah.
And I think that Martha would be wildly successful still, and it would be different than it is now. But it would be so interesting to see what would have happened.
Yeah, I'd agree.
If she didn't have this kind of derailing it.
It's
like first female billionaire, send her to prison.
Right. Well, even also with that in mind, if this never happened, what feminism would look like now? Because she very much brought the idea of you can do it all, but also being perfect. So I'd be curious if women would have more of a lean towards I don't know, because I feel like trad wives are starting to come back into quote popularity, or they're trendy. And she gave this idea of the perfect home, but also to be a businesswoman. So it'd be really interesting how she would have portrayed and like morphed with society as it went. It would be really interesting to see where the general people would be
Yeah.
in perspective.
For sure, because she has had a massive cultural impact, and it shifted when she had these legal issues
Yeah.
and had to rebrand and rebuild herself. So it would be totally different, and it would have been interesting to see like her transition as social media developed without this kind of a scandal. Although, of course, other scandals could have come up, and maybe there was way worse things that she was doing that didn't come out. That's possible too. I don't think that most people can ethically become billionaires. I think that there's probably a lot of stepping on people's necks to get there. And I'm sure that she maybe had to do some unscrupulous things, and maybe other things would have come out. But I just feel like it was kind of a lame reason for her to go to jail. And
Yeah.
I can't believe I didn't know that it wasn't insider trading. I really thought that's what it was.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the cultural understanding of it.
Right. Because again, it was the media, right? Everyone just reads the headline, but not the article.
Yeah. How about you? Do you have a big takeaway or a thought that you want to express about our girl, Martha?
I love her. I think her story is awesome. I agree. She probably had her moments, but go for it. If you have a dream, go for it. And honestly, men suck sometimes. And I think she really was the first one to stand up and be like, I don't really care about your opinion. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I appreciate that about her. I think women can learn from that, where just because you're told something is the way you should do it doesn't necessarily, if you won't have a dream, go for it. If a man tells you you can't do it, that doesn't mean you can't do it. Like,
absolutely. It's okay to advocate for your own ideas. And just because you like one thing, it also doesn't define you as a whole.
yeah.
And I feel like that just sort of clicked for me in a way. We were talking about feminism. We were talking about her image rebrand with Snoop. It's like she is feminine in a lot of ways. She's an amazing cook. She's an amazing housekeeper. She's an amazing, like the crafts, all of that stuff
Yeah.
are things that are so, the wedding things, all of the kids. She does a lot of female aesthetics, but she also is extremely shrewd and business minded in a way that I think people perceive as masculine.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that she's able to be pigeonholed into these tiny little boxes because she's complex. And I think that really everyone is. And it's such a good example of how you can be many things at once. And there's really no need to limit yourself.
Yeah. Completely agree. Well,
yeah, I love her too.
I think this was a good one. Positives, negatives. But I can't wait for our next ones. Anyone, I highly recommend watching this documentary if you haven't done it. It's lighthearted, it's easy watching, which is contrary to some of the other documentaries we watch. So I recommend checking it out.
For sure. I definitely agree. All right, Crystal, I will talk to you soon.
Until next time.